Looks like we are good.
Cool. So I'm not sure who put this one on the agenda, but we have supported versions for Kubernetes or for Istio 1.22. I think this should be pretty straightforward in my mind. We just bump it up one. So we add 1.30 and drop 1.26. Kind of a general.
Oh, yeah. It was right by me. And I just want to confirm before release the bet 0 for 122. So we just add one setting and remove 126.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
What about put the 113 to test but not support for 121 and 120?
Yeah, so Sanjay's working on getting 130 fully tested for the older versions. So if she does that or someone else does it, then we can do that. It just kind of requires the testing. That's all.
Okay, makes sense. And yeah, the next thing I want to raise up about there was still 3 release block for the next major release.
Yeah, I think a couple of those are the test ones, right? And I know
Yeah,
at least one of those is being worked. I don't know if the security one is.
Erica, can you open the project with?
That particular window.
Yeah. I think I recall you sent me the link about. Yeah. So anyway, working on this, I think the third one is someone working on around it, but I'm not sure if anyone working on the authorization one and the TLS original one.
Yeah, the TLS origination one I just closed. Keith fixed that 2 days ago, and we were just monitoring for whether it was fixed. I haven't seen any issues since then. So I'm almost positive that one's fixed, so I just closed that one out. Sounds like the first one we still need someone to own. Is anyone looking at that, or?
I can say I tried to enable the test yesterday and it's still failing. Sometimes they just miraculously get fixed by themselves, but I did try to enable it yesterday and it looks like that the test is timing out. But that's as far as I got with it yesterday.
Maybe I can take a look at it tomorrow. And yeah, I don't think it will be blocked for the beta, but it should be a release block for the RC.
Yeah, if you want to take a look, I guess I didn't put a link in my PR, but there's a PR in Istio.io recently closed by me, where I enabled it, and you could go look at the test artifacts and see what's in the log, see what might be causing the timeout. I'm assuming it's just repeatedly, waiting for something to get verified, and it's not right.
Okay. I will take it tomorrow. And the next thing I think it should be around the gateway API 1.1. I think we're all, yeah.
Yeah,
Go
so
ahead.
we updated to the master branch of Gateway, but they haven't yet cut the actual official 1.1. So I think what we'll do is we'll just backport it, and it should be low risk because they're not actually changing much. They're really just changing the official version number. So we can do that in the next week or two, probably week. I'll check with Rob and see if they have a date. Hopefully it's not like too last minute. Very worst case, like technically we don't need to be on the tagged version. The actual version tag doesn't really mean that much. So we should be fine either way. But the main PR that was like updating, to all the new features and whatnot, that already got merged, so that's good to go. I will say in general, not necessarily for the 1.22.0, in the new Gateway 1.1, there's all sorts of experimental features that were added. We don't implement any of them in Istio. Those are things that could be implemented. They're moderately decent, good first issues, or not first issues probably, but not super advanced, kind of isolated. Because they're experimental, they're all kind of off by default, so they have a somewhat lower bar. So if anyone's interested in working on those, I have an issue somewhere I can point to.
Okay, I just want to make sure if you cannot make it soon, I will publish the beta one, the first version of beta tomorrow.
Yeah, at the very least, we can get 1.1 RC release candidate. They will have that. I think they're aiming for like today or tomorrow, so that should be soon.
Okay, maybe I can just trigger another beta after you done it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can do multiple betas. That's no problem.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all from me. Thanks.
Yeah, I was gonna say typically, I think in the past, we try to do a beta.0 soon after branch cut, which is I know what we're trying to get done now. And then usually the beginning of the week is another one, just so we have something new for people to test the next week. So depending on when beta.0 comes out, you could do a beta.1 on Monday or Tuesday would make sense.
Okay.
And John, just to back up a second, on the qualification testing for 1.30 with 1.21, is the thought still there? We just run the long running test and then add the appropriate integration test to run on that?
Yep. Yeah, exactly that. So I think the only gap really is, I think we might have already added the integration test, maybe not. But it's a little hard to run the long running tests because generally we run them on cloud providers and cloud providers are slow.
Yes.
So now we have that whole Equinix thing. That's just a bunch of VMs we can install arbitrary Kubernetes on if we wanted to. Although there's some contention with who is using that and stuff. So anyhow, there's people working on it. Once we get the tests, assuming they'll all pass, which I have no reason to believe they won't, given master is already running on 1.30 and everything's fine. There's no issues at all. Then yeah, we can flip the switch there.
Okay.
Keith?
Yeah, John, are you still working on that gRPC route v1.1 PR?
So that one's, thank you for reminding me about that. Yeah, that one's tricky because it's fully ready to go. The problem is that it depends on the gateway CRDs saying that they are 1.1, and they won't say that they're 1.1 until they release 1.1.
Gotcha.
So it's a little problematic. Let me ask Rob about that. I wonder if they can put the RC there.
That would be helpful, I think, because if we're doing any kind of switching based on the minor version, they should probably start changing that when they release RCs like moving forward, I would think.
Well, JK is still at beta 1 in many cases, so it's going to be interesting. So we need to read beta basically.
Well, but you can't. They're changing every. Well, it's alpha, right? They don't have a beta for gRPC route, do they?
No, it was in the experimental or something alpha, and it's not deployed definitely in JK because you only deploy the V1 or beta.
Sorry, so what's the issue with GK?
No, JK is still at beta 1, beta 2, whatever it is.
No, there's no gRPC beta. It went from experimental to GA.
Yep. So it's,
Oh,
it's
for the other types, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, all the other types we read the beta versions. So we should be fine there.
no. I mean that means we need to read the beta. So our reader will read beta, and I think we can probably get V1 there if it goes up. Or
Yeah, so we read for HTTP route, we read V1 beta 1, but for gRPC route, we read V1. So
Okay.
we read the oldest stable version, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. Now we'll be screwed if they go and decide later to delete beta, but Rob promised me that he wouldn't do that. So hopefully they live by that. Eventually we'll probably move to V1, but there's no rush to do it. And so Keith, technically we could still ship on RC1 because there's no code that we need to change when they change. What changes is the CRDs, which are deployed outside of the scope of Istio. There would be a testing issue that all of our gRPC tests are broken until there, which we could either disable the tests, or that's probably not good, or like modify the version in the test. Like we can work around it if we need to. So I'm not terribly worried about that. But that is true. We do need to get that PR, and maybe let me add that as a release blocker.
That was going to be my main action item. I think is make sure we remember to make whatever changes we need to before we release.
Yeah. Can you also review, like, get approval on it, and maybe others? Here, I'll send the PR.
Right,
I'll post in the release managers chat as well, just to explain what's going on there because it's kind of weird.
Yeah, the tests were failing. I wasn't sure if that was I didn't look deeper into it to see if it was actual like bug with the PR.
No, it's expected. It's because it's disabling gRPC route, so all the gRPC route tests fail because the bundle version says that it's 1.0 when it's really 1.1.
Gotcha. And we did make sure that they're not going to do. Oh, so here's my other question. I remembered. So, what is our plan going to be? Since right now we currently support experimental gRPC route, do we how do we handle? How does IstioD handle both alpha and V1?
Yeah, the simple answer is we don't. So we made gRPC route actually experimental in that you have to both opt into experimental gateway API and you have to go enable an experimental Istio flag. And so our stance there is when you upgrade 1.22, the experiment's over. You go to the stable one. There's no migration. There's no dual version support.
Okay, gotcha. I think that's the right move. Let's just make sure we. I'll put a comment in the PR to add a release note for that, or upgrade note explaining that nuance. I think some people who are using experimental gRPC route might not know what to do, or people who want to use gRPC route might think they have to add enable the flag or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks.
can I move to the next topic or?
Go for it, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this PR we discussed last week about DNS auto allocation. So some background in feature status, we have DNS proxying marked as beta. The link goes to the doc, which has no information except, turn this environment variable on and you get auto allocation working. And we have a couple of customers that did follow those things, and because we didn't block it, they are now kind of stuck with auto allocation for some use cases. And we tried to fix it, was rejected for probably good reasons. I'm trying to figure out what is the next step and what we can do. I mean, we have a controller, so we're working controller of trees that will allocate addresses and do some fixing. But it may interfere and break if there are any changes in the auto allocation in Istio. So I was wondering if we can make small changes to not write status in Istio, but just verify if someone else wrote a status and take into account and use it instead of the allocation. Because so it's a far smaller change than what was proposed. It's basically just if status in service entry has an IP, then don't auto allocate, but use whatever was allocated by the external entity. And that will also allow external DNS or other tools to use the same thing and populate manage DNS. Or I don't know, the feature is clearly not working. I mean, you saw the 256 bugs that was recently fixed of previous versions. I mean, it is beta, but in one in 200 cases it will break. So maybe we can adjust the status to say that it's not really beta. I don't know what's the proper, because last time we discussed and in the conversation was we updated the doc to say that auto alloc is experimental, but it's not experimental according to the docs. I mean, it's beta. John or others?
Yeah, I was just writing it down, so it was pre notes for what I'm about to say. So I think my overall goal is that the allocated APIs are persisted in the CRD, kind of like cluster IP services. So my broad concern with the original discussion last week was that we weren't using it as the actual source of truth. We were just saying, here's what the status is, and they can change it any time. So it was more of a debugging than actually fixing the fundamental problems. So it vaguely sounds like what you're saying kind of solves that. I think you were saying that we use it as a source of truth, but there's still kind of a lot of design decisions. Well, actually, there's really two in my mind. It's where the status, where it lives. Is it in status? If so, where? Is it in spec? Is it an annotation? And then there's who writes it, whether it's Istio in a webhook or a reconcile loop or some third-party thing, and how we know to do auto allocation, because today auto allocation is per proxy, it's not per service entry. And so depending on some of the other decisions, like if we write in spec, for example, then there needs to be some user intent to say that. If it's status, then maybe we can do it. We just say we always allocate it, but it's not necessarily always used. So there's a lot of design choices. Like it really feels like this is begging for a design doc that goes over some of these choices. And
we can update the design doc for auto allocation if it helps.
I mean, the design doc was probably terrible and like 4 years old.
No, it doesn't exist. It was implemented without any design doc and just cut in into beta, without any kind of review. But my point is, I'm not trying to fix auto allocation. What I'm saying is, whatever the byte shading decides, annotation, status, whatever it is, we can write it. We can have a controller that writes a status or annotation or both or anything in the service entry. All we need is that Istio looks at one of those places, and if it is found, then it's using it. It's backward compatible because, again, it's just a new field and a new annotation that indicates that a particular IP has been allocated by someone. The semantic is that it's exactly like its service, or if it was specified in service. We could even modify service entry to actually populate IPs in the spec, but that will create other problems. And then at least will have stable allocation, as you said, which also probably work with ambient and with ambient with external DNS, because that really is a problem that each pod may get a different IP, which is again semantically impossible to do it with external DNS or with a managed DNS server, since again it depends on the pod. With ambient, obviously, it's also impossible because I suppose it's difficult to implement because again DNS depends on the pod. So in other words, for if someone runs a controller that can populate an IP addresses in this field, there will be no auto allocation. For people who like auto allocation as it is, they'll keep using auto allocation because there is no controller that is setting the field. Does it make sense?
Not really. I mean, so if you want to set it in spec today, you can do that. If you want to do something, the thing that I'm confused about is you complain constantly, and fully justified. I think the same way about DNS auto allocation not being well thought out and implemented hastily. But then when I'm asking you to write a design doc and have a list of trade-offs that we need to discuss in the design doc, the solution is to not do that and just go hastily implement another solution. I'm not sure why we don't want to do this properly.
I'm not trying to implement auto alloc. I'm trying just to say that Istio will, use an annotation that, is a feature itself. It's very large and very complicated. Implementing auto allocation is not as easy as it sounds. Again, we can do it in our fork. We have a fork and we can fix just our fork. But then the problem is that if someone is changing it, we'll have even bigger problems.
Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I certainly think that there are times where it's necessary and appropriate to kind of to declare tech debt bankruptcy and move forward if it's going to result in processes that prevent you from getting to that same place again. Where I'm a bit confused with what you're suggesting, Costin, is that I don't see the path to auto allocation getting better. I get that, with the annotation stuff you're proposing, I think I understand how that might move complexity around, or it might improve the experience to some degree. But how does that prevent that feature from continuing to ossify? How does that prevent us from ending up worse?
It's not. I don't see any way we can save this feature, or we can kind of go forward with the path it is on. If someone has a design doc, they should write it. But I'm very curious to how it will work with the current requirement of specification and behavior. What I'm trying to do is to provide a way to bypass it. So even if someone is relying on this feature, we should have a way to have a subset of the feature, which is stable allocation I don't know. It again, how is Ambient going to deal with those customers?
I'm confused. Maybe I'm not understanding what you're suggesting, but to me, what you're saying doesn't make sense. So let me explain what I think, and you can tell me why I'm wrong. It sounds like you're saying auto allocation can't be fixed, but we're going to go write our own controller that does auto allocation correct outside of Istio, and we want that to be supported by Istio. But why can't we just do it right in Istio? That's what I don't understand.
We could, but again, I don't want to get into the bike shedding on how to allocate. And it's one thing to do an internal thing that we control and we can, iterate over it. Probably it will be some hack initially.
So it sounds to me like we have an idea on how to do it right, but to do it right requires too much work. So
no. To do it right in Istio is different than do it right in a different controller, because you can have something that is cross cluster. We have VPC. We have different requirements than normal Istio. It's VPC. The DNS is VPC scoped, so it's cross cluster from start. And the auto allocator for what we need, it's very unlikely to match what Istio is doing.
I get if there's different implementation in Istio and your Istio-like thing that you don't want to work on Istio, and I think that's fine. But I think the minimum bar should be that you build an interface that can be implemented by both of them.
Yes.
And even if you don't do the actual implementation in Istio, it's fine. But I feel like the minimum bar to adding that hook is to actually have a credible design such that it could be implemented in Istio and that it meets those requirements. And then we can have someone else go implement the Istio side.
I actually want to implement it in external DNS because, again, that's a component that is synchronizing with DNS, and it's in a much better place to do this setting. And the interface is actually this annotation or status. So basically, any controller or any kind of mechanism that allocates addresses and synchronizes with DNS would set this and cause Istio to respect the allocation, basically.
Yeah, so I feel like we still need the design doc, and we still need to make these design choices. You just don't need to commit to implementing the Istio side of it, but we still need to know that how we would do it and that we could do it and that it's
okay. Okay, so I can write a design, but about the contract with the interface. The interface would be, some controller implemented in Istio or outside of Istio or will populate the status just like the service controllers. And that would satisfy your requirement. I mean, design for the interface instead of design for the implementation.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable as long as it, like, obviously we need to be able to look at the doc and say we can make an implementation of this that makes sense, right?
Okay, I'll write something and talk with the people.
Yeah, just want to call this out specifically. One of the concerns I want to make sure we address is if we're doing it with the controller, which it sounds like is what we're leaning towards, how do we handle when there's not yet an IP allocated? So that's something we'll want to make sure we cover.
Sure. I mean, my concern to deal with the case when an IP is allocated, and then we can discuss the limitations. That if it's not allocated, then
no, I mean there's a race condition, right? The service entry is created, and then the controller adds the IP address.
Same with service. Same with service. Service type of balancing.
Service gets the IP during creation time. Once you create a service, there's never a moment that there's not an IP assigned.
With gateways, then.
With gateway, yes, and they have a story for what that looks like. So we just need to, like today in service entry, we don't have such a story, right? Like we don't have any code that handles that. We don't treat something without an address as like not ready and exclude it from pushing to Envoy, for example.
Yeah, my thinking was to just cut and paste what the gateway object has because it has a status or IP is populated.
Right, but the thing on gateway is an IP is coming later. On service entry, the problem we need to solve is how you say this doesn't have an IP yet, but it's going to later. Yeah.
Okay, I'll that's kind of the same. Okay.
Okay, cool. I think that one's probably wrapped up unless anyone else has something, and that's also the last item on the agenda. So anything else we should discuss? Yes.
Hey, yeah. So I right now we're in the middle of a lot of 1.22 release planning and not planning, more like executing and getting out the door. But I think it's times like these where we are, and we've got the branch cut. I think it might be good for folks to start thinking about big themes or features or check that payoff that we want to, as a community, try to start thinking about for 1.23, especially things that might be bigger and need a lot of collaboration and consensus ahead of time. So cost and the service allocation interface design, I think that's if that's something that you want to do, I think that's a really good candidate. I saw Rama have a discussion about WASM plugin types of things, workload selector. Not saying I we're going to do that, or I even agree we should do that. But those sorts of things that that folks have in mind, I'm sure we're going to have a slate of ambient related things as well. But it occurs to me that might be a good time for to be thinking about big themes and stuff for 1.23. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I will say 1.22, I think, is probably the biggest release we've had in a very, very, very long time. So I would expect 1.23 probably to be quite a bit smaller, but or this is a sign every release now is going to be very large. Either one works for me, but yeah, I agree. We should probably start some planning doc. Trying to make distro list on by default was one thing that I've had on the back of my mind, but I'm a little scared to actually go do it.
Yeah, I can start the doc if that'll be helpful. I'll attach it to the this meeting's agenda for folks to see. Distro list on by default's a big one. John, I remember I saw I think it was a couple of months ago, but it's in the agenda doc here. But a few weeks ago, you brought up the getting fully compatible with Gateway API and changing potentially changing sidecar routing from host hierarchy to cluster IP. I think that is something to. I don't remember if you got consensus on that or not, but that might be something to bring up again. Because it would be if conformance profiles and stuff, it would be nice to be fully conformant. But like I said, I'll start a doc and folks can add their big ideas or suggestions onto it.
Yeah, that's another good one, but it's even scarier than distro list on by default. So we'll need to think about. It keeps coming up as something that, like, for things even outside of Gateway API, especially around ambient, that it's something we need to do. But it's just such a big behavioral change. It scares me a bit. But yes, we should look into that. All right. Sounds like we should drop off and reconvene at 10 for the ambient meeting. See you all. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.